with that, let's go ahead and get started. We're all here and let's get going. That's one way we can optimize remote work. So thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be talking through a couple key concepts today as we get started. But before we do that, one way that we actually wanted to optimize your experience right now is for those folks that will be listening all the way through the webinar, we'll actually be handing out over 50 Starbucks gift cards to make sure that you can have an enjoyable rest of the week and get going and cover all these amazing topics. And so with that, my name's Chase. I'm a principal strategist here at JumpCloud. And then we are fortunate enough to be joined today by Adriana at Bamboo. Could you introduce yourself and maybe describe a little bit more your role and function?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chase. Welcome, everybody. My name is Adriana Clark. I am the HR manager here at Bamboo HR, and we are so excited to be a part of this webinar with JumpCloud and talk to you a little bit more about how to build a great employee experience.
Perfect. Well, and then as we start to dive in, what's really helpful is kind of what we want to start thinking about is, as we're starting to think about optimization, what do we want to start with? What is our end goal, right? What are we trying to accomplish with all these increments and these incremental improvements to the employee experience? Because we want to make sure that we can start on the right track by having access to everything that we need to have work done, regardless of where our physical selves are, including beautiful backgrounds or wherever we might be within the world. There's still that core tone and experience that we want to make sure comes through regardless of where that is. And so over the last 2.5 years, we've spent a lot of time thinking about the physical aspects of remote work, right? And so you think about commuting as a bonus, right? A lot of us are spending a little bit less time in the car during very crucial times in our day when we think about being productive kind of in the morning or trying to get home to our families, right? So we're getting a little bit more of that. So we don't have to spend time in the car to kind of go in, then put on headphones and try to be productive as ourselves. And so we're thinking about the physical aspects of that remote work. And wherever we want to be. Now we have even a little bit more optionality of like, well, great, maybe I can work over here, what time zones, I can still work within our manager. And even for me, like being able to run a webinar here in a hotel room, so that way I can combine some digital experiences as well as physical experiences to have the most impact that we can have. And all of these experiences really help set the tone for those employees as we're thinking about it. And so when we're thinking about optimization, we really want to start at the beginning. And then what I mean is like the beginning, and thinking about even the perspective and the words that you're using. And so for a lot of us, you're not even thinking about, well, remote work. It helps set, a lot of those by even that sense of like, well, maybe someone else is having a lot more fun in the office, right? Well, like I'm remote and everyone else is over there. But that's not really the case. We're actually a distributed team. Thinking about we're all contributing and making sure that you can help that. And so by even being intentional about the words that you're using, you can help shape that perspective and even broaden your own perspective on how to optimize even the smaller parts of shaping that employee experience. And so with that, we're going to start with kind of the employees joining the organization, right? What is their beginning and how can they start within that? So for here, we're going to use a quick example. We're going to be leveraging, Mary Adams coming and joining the organization. So as she joins, we really want to take those first steps, right, of understanding, physically, but then digitizing her, right, and then allowing her to create those identities and then access into everything that she needs, kind of giving her superpowers, making sure that she has access to those resources to really get work done and kind of perform her role to the best of her abilities, regardless of where she is in the world. And so we're going to be taking a couple steps and understanding what that is. Because as a new hire, when you're joining, you're really expecting seamless access. Because in today's day and age, when you're thinking about joining an organization, that access level kind of acts as a proxy for trust. And when you have that in kind of the absence of some formal communication structures that people might be used to, if I can't get in here, I can't generate reports, like who do I go to? What does that mean? Is it me? Is it you? Do I need to talk to someone in order to make that happen? And so by allowing kind of that access from day one, you're establishing that base level of trust and allows employees to think about all the other larger things that they need to be concerned with, right? Building relationships with their hiring manager, understanding the team, the culture, and all of those pieces so that we can actually move on to the more important aspects and do those pieces. And then one way to think about this is kind of like a time to contribution curve, right? So if you have access to everything from day one, you can start to understand actually being very productive very quickly, because most people want to come in and perform the role and do the best of their abilities. But when you have those bullet points of kind of frictions and they're not kind of able to get everything that they need from day one, oh, that report lives over here, oh, we need to go set some time up with so-and-so, all of those different efforts kind of slow those things down. And what's more importantly is when you do that, it also kind of helps set the tone and the pace of what they can expect for other things, right? After they've already been onboarded and they have a better sense of it, that pacing kind of also stays with them. So if you're able to set them up on the right start, it actually continues on and allows them to have a fantastic experience. So what does that mean technically? So the next piece that I wanted to walk through is a little bit more what that integrated employee life cycle looks like. And so for this example, right, so we just hired Mary, she's coming in, we've leveraged Bamboo and all amazing technology to kind of get that in. So now we've integrated that within JumpCloud, and we now have that digital representation, that, you know, the digital self of Mary. So the next thing that we want to do is actually assign that access. Well, we're going to put her into groups of access, understand, you know, what types of machines, what types of applications she needs to have access to, and all that before she even starts. And then we're going to go actually one step further by leveraging a couple different protocols, perhaps SCIM, to actually provision those identities. So now we're not only thinking about the authentication, but also the authorization into all those right applications, so we have access to everything that you need, but then also nothing that you don't from a great security posture perspective. Then kind of this longer middle area, right? Even though it's kind of looking here, but if you think about it on a timeline, managing that identity over time. So as she's joined the organization, perhaps she's moving around. So maybe starting from individual contributor, kind of moving into manager, senior manager, or even switching teams along that side. So one of the other best practices that we recommend is kind of thinking about that from security and access matrix. So that way within the role, as you know that you're joining, you understand all the different applications of the things that you need access to, then also too understanding that progression timeline as she moves around the organization. And then finally, you know, as we all say goodbye and kind of have great tenures or chapters in our career, we also want to safely offboard that identity. We'll be spending a little bit more time on what that means and the impacts of that a little bit later as we go through. And so with that, I'm going to actually hand it over to Adriana kind of from a different perspective and understand, you know, how those great beginnings help with a great onboarding experience.
Thank you, Chase. So what I want to do is let's discuss the impacts of effective onboarding and what that means. And really what it boils down to, it's all about the employee experience, and that really starts before day one. The process starts once the offer is actually accepted, but even before that, we can take a look at the start of the recruiting process. How is that experience for the employee? Onboarding is a critical part of the employee life cycle. Not only does it affect retention, but it affects new hire expectations and also the employee's time to contribute. So we want to make sure that the employee has everything they need to be successful. Some of the things that we want to consider is, do they have their equipment? Simple things as, do they know where to go? Are they able to connect with a team and their manager, specifically now in more of a remote workforce? Also, has the manager taken the time to set the expectations for day one, for the first week? And taking it even a little bit further, what do the next 30, 60, 90 days look like? When employee is aware what to expect prior to their first day, this will result in, again, in a better employee experience, which then leads to much better retention. With that, the employee feels much more welcome, they are more invested, and effective onboarding confirms that the employee has made the right decision by joining your organization. So let's talk about great onboarding. Great onboarding increases retention by 82%. This is a significant number, and it demonstrates how important and critical onboarding and orientation is, and also the effect that it has on the employee's career, their longevity with the organization. Let's talk about a little bit here how to leverage and how we can promote the remote work. Employees want flexibility, and one sure and easy way to do this is by actually offering that remote work. not only is remote work what employees want, but there's also a lot of cost savings associated with that as well. Two things I wanted to highlight. First is commuting. You take that away, right? Working from home, there's fewer commuters, less cars on the road. And I think most of us have noticed with the higher gas prices, this is a huge cost savings for the employee. For the employer, office building, the cost of being able to lease office space drops dramatically. So considering work from home, it really isn't a new concept for us, but it's being adapted more and more, especially after the pandemic. So prior to the pandemic, there were over 5 million employees in the US that work from home at least half of the time. And what we have found is that employers can save about $11,000 per year per person who works remotely half of the time. So again, huge cost savings, right? But some of the things that we need to be very mindful of is that this could affect the connections that employees have, especially new hires that have been brought on during the pandemic, and maybe now your organization is fully remote. Making sure that employees are able to connect with their colleagues, because again, during this time, they haven't had that opportunity. They've never spent time in an office, and that could feel, they could have that sense of gap of what is the culture like in the organization. So it's really important to make sure that you have things set up to address potential roadblocks. So we recently did a survey, and we see that this is very universal. 45% of organizations have seen a significant increase in resignations from the previous year. So if you're feeling this, you're not alone. We see that in all organizations or across all different functions. When we see this, this is really an opportunity for us. Let's lean into this. Let's get our arms around it. Let's own that in our HR functions as managers and as leaders. Another trend that we're seeing is that there have been an increase in remote job searches on LinkedIn. So really, in other words, candidates are showing far more interest in remote jobs versus opportunities that are on site. This matters because as companies are eager to get back to the office, what candidates are doing is they're sending a very strong message to let us know that they prefer to work remote versus an office. So definitely something to consider. Another thing is employees are looking for employers that value their needs and allow them to be flexible on how, where, and how they work. This has become even more important as many people leave organizations, especially in the Great Recession, or transition to new opportunities. This preference of working anywhere and having that flexibility is very appealing. So making sure that if your organization is able to do that, that you're providing those flexible remote opportunities. So the next thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about is I wanted to speak to what we have done here at Bamboo HR to handle some of the retention issues. We have decided to focus on 4 priorities. The first one is we have prioritized employee satisfaction and the employee experience. So what we need to do is make room for initiatives to build and support that experience. If this is going to be a priority for us and for your organization, we need to make sure to make room for it in our daily workload. The second thing is we have created methods to collect authentic feedback. So a big part of our culture is to be open, where this allows our employees a safe space to provide honest feedback. So you need your people to tell you you need authentic employee feedback. Partnering with your employees and having them really be a part of the solution. At Bamboo HR, we have spent many years cultivating a culture of honest feedback. And we really want to be intentional and respectful of that. The third point is creating an effective framework for benefits. Taking a look at your benefits program, being open to making adjustments or changes based on the needs of our employees. What this does is this helps to create a foundation of security and support for your employees. At Bamboo HR, we have identified 5 pillars around our benefits program, and this is something that we take a look at anytime we're looking to explore other options, or if we're looking to change any of our benefits. We're looking at physical health, career excellence, financial fitness, social and emotional wellness, and community well-being. These pillars are authentic to us. So we look at these and what the employee needs are and what the opportunities are around our benefits programs. We also have a mission statement behind each pillar. And then this shows us how to choose and why we choose our programs. So knowing the why behind it is really important and critical as a part of this process. This will also be different for each organization, but what you want to do is be thoughtful and much more purposeful when you're looking at these benefits. And then the fourth one is we have really taken great strides in fully assessing and meeting the mental health needs of our workforce. So really taking a look at mental health and the employee wellness in the workforce and how we can actively drive that. So some of the things to consider is how are we engaging with our employees? How do we help acknowledge and support them? Like most organizations, we do have a great employee assistance program. This is a resource that's available to all of our employees. We offer free services, and it has been very rewarding. And we have definitely seen a much higher and increase in utilization in the program, especially in the last couple of years. But it all goes back to making sure that we're listening to our employees, we're addressing that, and we're giving them the information on how to receive those services. And with that, we are trying to be real and really help our employees see what those resources are for them. In one of our recent surveys, we have seen an increase. 87% of our employees said that they feel stressed about their well-being. So again, this was an opportunity to get creative and make sure that our employees are aware of the benefits that are available to them. So these are just a few things that our organization has done and has helped with better retention and better engagement with our employees. So next thing I want to talk to you about is the employee survey. So one of the first things you want to do is, does your organization even have this? Here at Bamboo HR, we have created a culture of feedback. When you give feedback, sometimes it can feel like criticism, and it can be very hard. There could be very many challenges in getting people to be critical, right? There's natural defenses, office politics, fear of damaging a relationship, fear of underperforming, or even fear of reprisal and compensation. So in giving feedback, will this somehow, in some way, affect me in being honest, right? So it's very critical and important that you build a culture of openness and a culture of feedback. And again, that's something that we have done here at Bamboo HR. What you want to do is lay down the ground rules for your people. Outline what is fair feedback and what is out of bounds. So being very transparent. You want to hold people accountable. Are you doing it from a place where you want to help? So what's the intent behind it? And are you communicating that? Also, you don't want to be in a place where you're diluting the information. You want to be very clear, you want to be very kind and supportive. So again, when you're asking for that feedback, transparency is key. We use a survey to affect change in our organization. 55% of people said that their company only sometimes makes changes on the employee survey responses, so more than half. So the trend has been that organizations are asking for the feedback, but employees don't feel that their employers are listening and doing anything with that. So think about this. If someone asks you for feedback, you give it to them, they say thanks, and then just move on. How does that make you feel, right? It doesn't feel very good. It makes you think like, does it even matter? So the worst thing you can do is first not ask, but the second thing is to ask but do nothing with the information. So remember, if you're asking for that feedback, you need to be able to have a way to look at the information or show your employees that you are listening. This is how you are building a relationship of trust, right? When you have purpose to feedback, then you can also use the data much more powerfully, right? Because you have built that relationship, there's trust there, employees are being very honest with their feedback, which then gives you accurate information. Then you have accurate data that you can use within your organization to make the proper changes that are necessary. So let employees know how you use the feedback, educate them. So you have purpose and you can use that data much more powerfully. And also, if the employee understands the outcome, they're going to be much more open in sharing that feedback with you. So a couple takeaways is help employees feel heard. Surveys open up acknowledgement that you see them, that they are real people. You're building a culture where people feel heard. Give them a platform for each voice and recognize those opportunities. And remember that we are building trust, working together to solve the right problems. So let's go ahead and move on here. Let's talk about the employee experience. So making room for the employee experience. In order to do that, to make room, that really starts with we're looking at what are our daily HR jobs. We need to make room for initiatives that build and support that experience. If this is going to be a priority for us, we need to make room for it in our daily workload. So here are some areas you can look at prioritizing quickly. So first thing you can do is you can automate tasks. So really embracing the technology that you have, or perhaps looking at opportunities to get the technology that you need. We want to focus on things people do and the things that technology do. Letting technology do the things that they do best then opens up people to do what people do best. Training people to use the technology is another key component. Things you can automate, for example, like time off or approvals, right? Another thing to look at is employee self-service. How much is available? Adapting the same user experience, having available information for your employees. So for example, perhaps your benefits. Do your employees know where to find the information? Is it even available, right? So then again, you're allowing them to be much more self-sufficient and be able to go and get that information for themselves. And lastly is really focus on collaboration. How do you maintain flow? We want to have an effective process, remove any complexity, and have a natural flow. Technology is definitely a great place to do that. So, for example, having an HRIS system like Bamboo HR, right, to house all of the employee data, help boast data and additional functionality to help them get things done on kind of that day-to-day basis. This is important to the employee, but also to the organization. So let's talk about prioritization. How do we do that in HR work when we have so many things happening and so many things we have to get done? What you want to do is you want to look at the foundation. How are you doing in your core HR work? How's your compliance, your payroll, managing your day-to-day things? Some of the areas to look at that are strategic. How will this influence the employee experience? Is there intentional way in culture? Are you looking at turnover? Are you analyzing and getting feedback? What are you doing with that information? But also engaging with managers, identifying career development opportunities. So the more efficient you are in solving each priority, the more employee experience priorities you can then fit in your day and focus on. So now I will turn it over to Chase.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. And so we've talked a lot about kind of how to engage employees, how to get a better benchmark, understanding of where everyone's at. But no matter what you can do, people are always on a progression kind of in having different chapters of their career. And so when it comes to finally saying goodbye, we also want to do it securely. And we want to understand that flow and kind of how those things work. So the last and largest big scary number that I wanted to showcase is the scariest one of them all. And so we've seen that over 63% of employees take data from one employer to the next. And this is not to say that everyone's nefarious when they're doing this, right? But you can think about when people are moving and progressing, they're typically going into similar roles, similar job functions, similar departments, similar industries. And so it's not to say, hey, we're just going to snatch and grab and go from there, but they're bringing a lot of knowledge from one organization to the next. And so to kind of help prevent that last and final security gap, it's one that folks might often not think about, because even though you had a great relationship with the person, it's like, oh, they'll be fine, see what's going on from there. But you never understand in terms of the types of assets that we really want to keep within the organization and help protect that IP. So I wanted to spend just a couple minutes kind of walking through, thinking about offboarding that identity. And the great thing about when you have everything tied together, from identities to devices to all of their access and resources all under one platform, is from an offboarding scenario, really it becomes very simple, because like, well, we just need to suspend that user, and then automatically we're revoking access across each one of those pieces. And so while it's very effective and very speedy, it also helps ensure and safeguard the organization as you're removing access across each one of those different pillars and you comes across of it. And so on the last piece, just real quickly, next slide, we've also kind of talked about, onboarding, and now a little bit more on the tail end of offboarding and what that looks like. And now I want to spend some time thinking about, well, what does that relationship look like between HR and IT, and how do we come together? Because typically, we're brought together at those points, right? When folks join the organization, when they're moving through the organization, changing their access, and then finally when they're leaving the organization. And they're around kind of joining, moving, and leaving. We also want to make sure that we can have as an integrated experience as possible. We want to make sure that data, is merged together, so that way everyone is on the same page. And when we're doing that, we're also making sure that all that information is securely. And so that way, there's not key information left on some email or kind of a Google sheet over here, or kind of, oh, did you fill out this form in a t-shirt size? What, all of those different aspects we want to make sure is done securely. And also too, within a lot of different organizations, manual process, you need to be able to operate at scale, right? There could be a multiple batch of, perhaps if you're on a hiring spree, kind of bring 10, 15 people kind of even on an onboarding class, like that's a lot of information to make sure that you all need to stay in sync. And what that does is also too, it creates a better employee experience, right? And you got to be trusted. If hey, I give you that information once within Bamboo, I expect that information to be flowed all the way through into my user identity, my access, my experience, and everything else that we can do from that. And so with that, I actually just had a quick question and kind of pause, because we here with us today. I'd love to just kind of pick your brain and what has your experience been from an HR perspective interacting with your IT counterparts at Bamboo?
Thank you, Chase. It's definitely a very critical part. If you don't have that good relationship with your IT team, things don't go very well. It really goes back to having that good employee experience, right? That really sets the tone on day one. So if HR and IT does not have that good working relationship, there's so much room for error and not having that good employee experience. So day one, making sure, do they have the equipment they need? Do they have access to the right programs? We want to set the employee up for success on day one. I'm sure many of us have had the experience where we started a job and our computer wasn't working, or you didn't know that you didn't have access to certain programs. You're now in a training class and that's delaying it, right? It has this whole ripple effect. So making sure that we're setting that tone and that they have the information they need in order to be successful, right? So then on the flip side, on the offboarding piece, again, it's still continuing that relationship. Even though they're leaving the organization for whatever reason, it still boils down to that employee experience, right? We want to set them off on a good note. We want that experience to be a positive one. So with that is making sure that, are we cutting out off the right access at the right time? Are they done for the day? Are we being very cognizant with our proprietary information, our customer information, making sure that there's secure checkpoints to make sure that, again, as this employee is exiting the organization, and that they're not taking any of that information with them, or that there's any kind of liability or risk associated with it. So again, I think IT and HR, if you don't have that good working relationship, that's definitely going to affect that employee experience. And it's definitely a very critical part of the whole process.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think as we wrap, I think we just wanted to share a couple key best practices, and then we'll kind of dive into some Q&A here soon.
Absolutely. So finally, what I wanted to discuss were 5 best practices in building trust and emotional engagement. So practicing good meeting etiquette, right? Practice with what makes you most productive. Define team responsibilities. What are the priorities? Build accountability. Make sure there's clear communication and expectations. Make yourself visible at work, especially if you're working remote. Being remote means making an intentional effort to connect. Connecting with your team, with your manager, scheduling time to socialize, but most importantly is creating boundaries between work and life. And then finally is really focusing on that mental health. So remember to always communicate, keep an open door relationship, connect, get to know one another. And again, being remote, it takes an extra step because we do have to be much more intentional to make sure that the employee feels that they're a part of the team, they understand the culture of their organization, and they're not so siloed and alone, especially when we're working remotely.
Perfect. Amazing. Well, thank you for sharing kind of all of those best practices as we continue. So we're actually kind of move away from slides and engage a little bit more in the discussion. But if you're interested in learning more, we actually have a quick poll that's going to be popping up here on your screen kind of as you start to think about that as well. If you have any burning questions, other things that we can go through, feel free to start throwing those into the chat, and then we'll be going through those here shortly. All right, we're still seeing some questions kind of being answered. I'm seeing all those percentages change, so we'll probably just give it about another 30 seconds and we'll close the poll here shortly. And it looks like we already have some great questions coming through. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for being able to hop in there. It looks like, all right, so I'm kind of starting to look through, seeing some questions. We've seen some few in there. If you didn't ask anything, so yes, all of this will be recorded and we'll be sending it out. The first question we have is coming back to the $11,000 that, kind of the cost savings is like, where does that number come from in terms of looking at, and I'm curious because now I'm sure there's a few people listening on the webinar that might ask that for a signing bonus in their next role.
So the information was gathered from Forbes. They recently did a survey earlier this year. I found it very astonishing as well. But again, when you're looking at it, at the whole thing, right? Looking at the cost savings on making space, leasing offices, things of that nature, desks, equipment, all these extra things, right? It definitely adds up. So those funds can definitely be used in other ways, but a lot of cost savings for the employer.
Yeah, perfect. And next, kind of as we're thinking about metrics, how do we measure that employee experience? So the question is, what measures do you use to measure the employee experience and making sure that that's successful?
So again, at Bamboo HR here, what we have done is really created a safe space and a culture of feedback. We conduct our employee surveys twice a year, so that's definitely a very critical part. Another part that you can look at is turnover, right? Do you have high turnover? If you do, what's going on there? We also do feedback sessions with all of our new hires after they started. We have check-ins at 30, 60, 90 days, seeing how was their experience, and we're taking that feedback and actually doing something with it. The same goes with offboarding. Another very critical part is making sure that you're getting a full understanding of the employee's life cycle and their experience. Where are areas and opportunities to improve, right? What are things that we should continue on doing when we're doing well? Those are great opportunities. Whenever you're able to get in front of your employees, you want to utilize that and take that information and actually do something with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just too as well from the Jump Clouds perspective, so we send out, our, same semi-annually kind of employee net promoter score, right? And we take that as a sense. And I think one of the other pieces too is not only do we have kind of a sense across the organization, right, of kind of understanding, and usually the question asked is like, hey, would you recommend Jump Cloud as a place to work for folks that you'd recommend it to, right? If we're kind of talking kind of, hey, getting referrals and kind of understanding our culture. And then what we do is we actually break it down too by department and leaders and managers. So that way, not only do you have a macro view across the organization, but then you can start to dial it down and see if there's any deltas. Where can we borrow best practices from? Like, what are you guys doing over there? What are the other elements to making sure that it's a cohesive experience, no matter who you're interacting with across the organization, as we continue to grow, as we continue to scale, right? And kind of bring on new people in different locations and really kind of taking the physicality out of it, but how do we make sure that we're intentional about our communication structures and other pieces? So there's, I'd say the hard metrics, right? Of kind of, scale 1 to 10, what does that look like for you? But then also making sure to capture all of the qualitative, right? And kind of understanding the elements of that. Is there a certain tone? Are there small quick wins, right? That might have been mentioned a couple times that's easy to win, right? Or kind of easy to implement, like, yeah, of course. And we've actually used that to implement several different programs, including kind of across the spectrum of mental health awareness all the way to more like subgroups, right? And kind of making sure that people connect around the passions and hobbies and other folks. We have so many different social Slack channels now, right, that are able to connect and bond folks across that. And so by having that metric sense and bringing that in, it allows the team to kind of also prioritize, what are the programs that we should be thinking about as we scale as an organization.
No, absolutely. And add to that, one of the feedbacks that we received in the end of last year in our ENPS survey was people were feeling very siloed, right? So this year we have made great strides. We actually have a committee in place. Our theme for the year is Connect. And so we have taken that and really made huge improvements on how we can be much more thoughtful when we're looking at initiatives for our organization to make people feel much more welcome and excited to be here and be able to feel part of the group. I recently did an exit interview where the employee actually highlighted that. And our satisfaction survey has gone up tremendously in just those efforts. But again, we built that culture of trust. Employees feel comfortable in sharing honest, authentic feedback. And in turn, we're able to take that and actually do something with it. So it all kind of goes hand in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have let's say a couple questions just regarding the integration specifically between JumpCloud and Bamboo HR, as well as kind of other systems, and making sure that they all work together. So I'm going to do my best to kind of combine and bucket them. First thing that I wanted to mention is that the integration itself is continuing to be enhanced. We're adding in more fields, looking at preferred names, making sure that we can have that full experience kind of from onboarding and offboarding all the way through. And so our teams are actively working on that right now to continue to enhance that experience, because we know that we have several, hundreds of joint customers, and kind of making sure that we can leverage these technologies between that and continue to enhance that, right? Because there's elements of more information that we're able to capture and more information that we're able to leverage to have a secure and great employee onboarding experience, as well as kind of leading into the documentation around it. So if you're curious, if this is new to you too, and you're like, oh my goodness, I'd love to streamline a lot of this and save some hours and get some time back within that, great documentation between both organizations in terms of how to get set up. So if you're not on JumpCloud already, you can create a JumpCloud account, dive into that, and we have documentation on how to enable Bamboo. And then likewise, if you're coming from Bamboo and you want to add in JumpCloud into that series and making sure it's seamless, everything is all set up on the Bamboo Marketplace to get started on your journey and look at it from there. So as there's more kind of integration questions come through, I'll be good to field that through. Next kind of question is, more question for Adriana. What are some of your go-to resources to learn about, innovative HR tech tools, right? Kind of adding it in, kind of when you're thinking about the Bamboo ecosystem, and then how do you think and then where do you go to for, kind of where's this conversation happening in the loudest place? Like, where do you go for hearing about innovation amongst, your HR peers?
So definitely a lot of collaboration. I'm constantly, and my team, we're constantly reading, looking at new articles that are coming out, being really engaged in our local community with trends that are happening, especially in similar industries, right? So building those relationships with those individuals, understanding what's happening. Are they kind of feeling the same pain points that we are? What are some of the strategies that they're using? So really, it's a very collaborative way, and just being able to leverage connections.
Yeah. All right. So I know we're getting closer to the 45-minute mark, and so looking through just kind of the last couple of questions. If you have anything else, please feel free to throw it in now. And if we don't get to your questions here, obviously we'll follow up individually, making sure that we're supported there. Next question we have is, are there any templates that you have in terms of best practice, either setups across different verticals that you can view, or just kind of help plan the onboarding and offboarding? So kind of within the senses, do you have a checklist that you go through to make sure that it's a good experience, but then also a consistent one?
Yes, so obviously we use Bamboo HR. So there you go. It will solve all of your problems.
Like that, easy.
Easy, done, right? So with having an HRIS system, it's great, right? Because you do have those checkpoints. So, you could have making sure that you're in compliance, you have all the information that you need to set up a new employee. Are they signing all of your policies and procedures? Is your I-9 completed, right? All those compliance things. But there is a human element to it. And so I don't want us to forget that, right? Because there's the systems part, right? But there's also that human element. And again, it really is a big part of who we are here at Bamboo HR. It's part of our culture. We have created our own outside of the system where again, recruiting or HR has a checkpoint at that 30, 60, and 90-day with the candidate to be like, hey, how are things going? I'm just checking in. Just want to say hi. How has your experience been thus far? Are you enjoying being here? Did you make the right decision? Then also providing support for your managers to make sure that they have the tools and resources to follow up with the employee. As I mentioned earlier, having those touch points. Are you reaching out to the candidate prior to day one? Do they know what to expect? Are you setting up a 30, 60, 90-day expectations for them and something to work towards too, right? And making sure that we have continuous training for our leaders to make sure that they're all doing the same thing and that employees are all getting that best experience and it's consistent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to add into that, so I think there's elements from the technology side. So making sure that, hey, working within both systems, making sure that's out, it might even come down to, what are our own custom scripts to making sure that even though we're laying down jump clouds, carrying the policies, all these other pieces, what are the other elements that we need to fold in to really have a concrete experience, but also secure one from day one. But a little bit more on the people side as well, to kind of give a lens into kind of how we operate within jump cloud. As we're bringing new employees in, there's a few other touch points that we like to add, right? And so every new employee is announced. So we have, kind of a company all hands every Wednesday morning. We kind of go through and we welcome the new class, if you will, right? Kind of everyone coming in. So that way you have a face and a name, and you understand where folks are coming within that organization. And then after they've joined, go through an onboarding scenario, training, kind of making sure that they understand culture and technology and kind of how we live and operate within the space for those that are new to it, and then even those that are veterans, right? It's also good to have that sense, but then also even being more intentional around, is a skip level meeting has been scheduled? Are there other areas that that person can present on and kind of be included within? Are there any other gaps that in terms of communication structures, aliases, whatever it might be, to making sure that they're receiving all that information? Because again, if they don't have that set up, or if that's not part of your checklist, there might be information happening within the void that you don't, they don't know to ask because they didn't see it in the first place. So making sure that there's that opportunities for context within that script or kind of within that list as you're walking through from that scenario, from the onboarding perspective. And then similarly from the offboarding perspective, right? So kind of, even though you're leveraging a platform to remove all that access and authentication all at once, like there's still pieces of, how do you run a really good exit interview? How can you make sure that even at that last point, it's a good moment in time? Because even if they're leaving on great terms, it doesn't mean that they can't recommend other friends of their talent to kind of join or keep other people in mind as the organization and culture kind of progresses within that, all the way down to nitty gritty things. Did you send a shipping label to kind of get, laptop and equipment back into the organization, right?
No, absolutely, because you do have a lasting impression, especially when the employee exits an organization. And so what kind of experience do you want them to have?
Absolutely. Well, perfect. Well, with that, I just really want to thank everyone for joining us today and kind of walking through and understanding how we can optimize, not only remote, but our distributed teams, and making sure it's really impactful, not only from the technology and integration side, but also adding in the human element to it all. So with that, thank you again for joining us today. We really appreciate the time and looking forward to having a great conversation with you in the future.
Thank you, everyone.
Please subscribe and check out more content from us.